Toro Z597 diesel series. Customer complaint, the diesel engine was knocking and smoking like crazy, so let's dive in and go over all this crazy stuff we had to do to this mower. No bluing, no bluing, and that sucker is black. Wanted to pop in real quick, put this in the beginning of the film instead of somewhere later on, the way you get this right up front. If you're considering an engine conversion from a gas to a diesel, there's a few things that you will definitely have to consider and look into, research before you do this. Oh yes, it can be done. Number one is your fuel system. So these tanks were loaded with diesel before, now they're getting gas. So each tank had to be evacuated and cleaned and flushed to make sure all the diesel was gone. A little bit's okay because it's basically just like fuel treatment, like for gas. Clean those out, and then the diesel system utilizes a supply line and a return line through your fuel tank selector. So you've got a line in from the left tank, a line in from the right tank, and an out to the engine, as well as a return from the left tank, return from the right tank, and return from the injector pump on the diesel side. What you can do is leave the return hoses attached to the fuel selector, because if you fill the tank up, those lines are going to be flooded with fuel. So just leave them into the selector valve block as it goes, and just block off your return from the injection pump with a cap, and just make sure you band clamp it really good, and that will keep the tanks from draining or flooding. You could always take the lines off and cap them at the 90s that come out of the return port on the tank. It's entirely up to you. I just went with what was simpler there and just left the lines where they were and just capped the return. The only thing I did was made sure that when I put the new gas in here to flush the system, I flushed it through the selector, left and right, outside, and what I've done is now that line goes directly from the selector up to my inline fuel filter right before the vacuum pulse pump on the Vanguard engine. So that's fuel system, number one. Number two is electrical system. I'll show you, but on these diesels, at least this specific build, there is no kill circuit. So you'll have to wire in an auxiliary relay for the function of just kill. Unless you just run a kill button or something, there's other ways to do it. But I wanted this to all be done by the key switch, seamless and clean. So that's issue number two. Issue number three is clearance. This thing will fit, but I'm telling you, it's tight. The diesel is an inline 3-cylinder, so there's room on the left and right. We're throwing in a V-twin horizontal shaft. Now that motor sits in there wider and your clearances are really tight. So that pan I made has the angles that sit on the motor mounts, and then a vertical drop, and then the horizontal plane that the motor sits on. You'll need cutouts to access your oil filter and access points to get your drain plug out. So I've got both in there. So starter is tight through there, but you can make it work. The biggest thing on this one was having to also reroute the air filter box, because this cooling radiator sits on top, which brings me to my next point. Point number four is the hydraulic system. Since you're running this air-cooled Briggs engine, it just needs to cool itself. There's no need for a radiator like the diesel that had antifreeze. However, since we're running a hydraulic system on this mower, it also used this radiator to cool the hydraulic fluid. Now, those two pumps that are on there don't cool themselves. They have to run through the cooler. So if you wanted to, you could probably run some auxiliary cooler, but for the sake of argument, this is a lot simpler to put this back on here, because on top of the radiator being used for the antifreeze and hydraulics, there's a hydraulic powered fan that sits right here. This is a hydraulic powered fan. So when it's circulating the hydraulic fluid, that fan's running and drawing air through this radiator. That's how it keeps it cool. So in order to cool the hydraulics, it has to flow through the radiator, and it has to have the air to suck through to cool it through the fins. That's why I use the same radiator setup, because everything's already here. I didn't have to pay anything extra for it. The only thing I'm doing is not using the antifreeze side. So that's 4 points. The fifth point is going to be your RPM difference, which is kind of back to the whole motor thing. I haven't noticed a big difference in the RPM performance on the hydros and the blades. I was concerned going from a diesel to a gas that my operating RPM was going to be a lot higher in the gas, and therefore overspeed a lot of the hydraulics and the blades. But that power band and that Vanguard is actually pretty similar to the diesel there. I checked the RPMs the operating RPM on the Vanguard and the operating RPM of the Daihatsu diesel, and I think there's only like 700, it was 700 or 800 RPM really difference. So I thought about going with a smaller pulley size, because if the Vanguard's running faster, it would bring things slower. I did the math on it. Figured if I went with like a 1/2 inch smaller pulley, it would be about the same, which I ended up having to get a new pulley for that side anyway, because the engine uses the front shaft. And you'll see, this was on the engine here. This used to run the alternator, which we're not using an alternator. We're using the rectifier on the system here. And then the other pulley, where's that? This was the other pulley that sat on the front of a shaft. And here was a stub shaft that was mounted to the diesel. So you will have to be conscious of the fact that some of these pulleys, you'll still need them where they were supposed to go, but you're going to have to get them for the right shaft now, since you don't have all these little stub engine shafts. So that's why I had to get a bushing and a sheave to fit that front pulley to run the hydros. The rear ended up being all about the same. The clutch still mounts on there the same. The little auxiliary pulley still mounts the same. And that's really about the biggest things you've got to look for on this before you do this. And you're going to have to run a choke cable, since it was diesel before, didn't have a choke. But you've got this Vanguard on here, which operates off of that carburetor choke and the throttle. So throttle's going to hook up about the same, but you have to run a choke cable. It's not a big deal. It's just really tight under that key switch. So I ran a little bit longer stem choke than I really wanted to, but it does fit. It's just a little tight. But other than that, it'll all fit and you can do it. There's just things you want to think, is it worth it? So all in all, we're doing this with an engine that's about $3,500. In my time, taking it to somebody like me, you're repowering this machine that cost about $17,000 now, to getting it done for about $5,000. If you figure, let's just round it $5,000. But that's entirely up to you based on the history of your machine. You know, if you think the trans are worn out on it, there's other things worn out on it, it's beat to death, it ain't probably not going to be worth it. Probably buy a used one off of Marketplace or Facebook or Craigslist, whatever. But this mower is still in pretty good tip-top shape, so that's why we did this conversion. However, if you're doing it for yourself, you probably save a lot more money if you have the time. So it could definitely be one of your winter projects, or if you've got another mower and you feel like working on something on the weekend, instead of going out to the bar and getting drunk and making bad decisions, spend your weekends at home here working on this thing. But that's it, you can do it. So that's what I got. This Briggs badged Daihatsu diesel that they have put in this Toro Z597 was apparently an engine they only put in 2 different things, according to legend. One goes in the Toro mower, the other goes in a Kawasaki Mule side by side, those utility ones. Now, problem is, if you can find parts for that Daihatsu diesel, they're sky high, if you can find them at all. And some of the rebuild services out there, which we were looking into, won't touch them for less than $3,500. And that's without parts, which you saw that rod was knocking, so the rod bearing was definitely spun, gone, worn out, and God knows what else in there. So it also had a couple other problems too. It was smoking real bad out of the exhaust. So I had some fueling issues. So you're looking at probably injector pump, injectors, if the crank could be polished, and possibly oversize the bearings if you had to, I guess, if you had to do a grind on it. Rod, piston, all that good stuff. Seal kits. So what we decided to do is put a Briggs Vanguard in here, pretty big. I think it's a 25 or 35 horsepower. You'll see it in the picture. So this motor, got it from Small Engine Warehouse, and it is 35 horse. Just carbureted, not fuel injected. 35 horse. We had to run one with a dual shaft, so it's got the front stub shaft and a rear standard shaft, because the front shaft runs the hydraulics for the hydro drive, and then your rear shaft runs your blade belts. It runs your clutch, which runs your blade belts, and then there's a auxiliary pulley stacked on that one that runs a hydraulic circulator. The hydraulic circulator goes to a radiator. Because this system was designed for a diesel engine with a water-cooled engine radiator, they had plumbed it in just like you'd see on a transmission into a vehicle. They've used the radiator to cool the hydraulic system, and they use it to cool the antifreeze. Well, since we're not using the antifreeze anymore because we've gone with an air-cooled Briggs, oil-cooled, air-cooled, it's got a little oil cooler on there. We still needed a way to cool the hydraulics because there's no fan on the drive. It's just a pump and a pulley. Still use that system to cool it. So I had to use this factory radiator, put her back on here, had to plumb everything up. Now, of course, we're not going to be using the antifreeze side of it, but it's still being used as a hydro cooler because you see down here you've got your drive pumps are there, and there's no cooling systems built into them because it utilizes this. So this has worked out pretty well for the engine conversion. The biggest headache, the largest headache, the biggest nightmare, the biggest thunderstorm, the biggest thing was getting the engine to fit in there just right to get all the clearance right. I wanted to make sure my shaft height sat the same. If you're measuring from the ground up, I wanted it to be the same. That way when you go to get belts, you don't need to modify length, get a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. You want all the geometry to be the same. So the hardest part was getting the motor mount. Of course, nobody sells such a thing. So what I did is I just fabbed a nice little motor mount out of sheet metal. Just some real small stuff that I was able to use those air tin snips, cut it how I want to, bend it in my press, and then some vise with some angle iron just to kind of get it close. Got everything in the way I needed it to go, dropped the engine down in there to see how everything fit. Figured while out there, that's close enough. So I took that plate up to Legendary Welding right there in Ross. He's an awesome guy, man. He's a good dude. He made it out of 1/4-inch steel for me. Did a great job. So I got that in there, and of course, you know, going from sheet metal, which had a little flex to it with weight on it, to a 1/4-inch steel, it didn't want to move. I do a little bit of fine adjustment in there. I had to take the cradles where the engine mounts used to be, because that diesel engine mounted just like a truck engine. It had a left and a right engine mount that were big rubber bushings. So what I did is I took those 45 cradles, took the bushings out, and I trimmed inside of them. That way my engine mount plate would sit just in there so nice. I'll show you a picture of the engine mount. Got that in place, bolted it in there, and I stitched across the top about 2 4-inch welds, 4-inch on each side. Bolts would have done it, but I put a weld on there because you know what? It's a mower, a lot of vibration, a lot of beating around. If a bolt breaks off or something, I've got a good stitch weld on there to hold it down. So just wanted to make sure. If you ever need to take that plate out for whatever reason, shouldn't need to, pop the bolts, cut those little 4-inch stitch welds right off the top, and she's good to go. So after I got all that dry fitted in there, pulled everything back out, painted everything, all the new metal I put in with some good Rust-Oleum, brush on thick stuff, and then I make sure all my bolt holes would be lined up. I had to drill holes in that plate for the motor mount where I needed it to be. And I'm talking, I've got clearances around this thing like an 1/8 inch here, 1/4 inch here. Like air filter to the valve cover, I think there's about a 1/4 inch. From the fuel pump to the front, from the framework there, maybe an 1/8 inch. And somehow, by the grace of God, I was able to get everything lined up just beautiful. So it has not been an easy task. It's been a lot larger of a task than I anticipated. But Bob, that's not your fault. You know, we're trying to get this going. And the idea is you can't even buy a mower like this for less than $17,000 right now. So we figured, okay, let's buy a motor. I think the motor was about, let's just say $3,500, and then my labor involved. So you've got $5,000 to $6,000 to repower this machine. That's been a great machine. It's a good Toro. He said he's had, you know, been a good machine to him. So give this thing some new life, and because he's kept it in the garage. Kept it in the garage, Bob. I know, it's nice. It's not a spot of rust on this thing for its age, but I'm glad we were able to get this going, and I still have to do some final checkups on it, but that'll be coming soon, and make sure everything is how it's supposed to be. My biggest worry was that motor was going to spin the wrong way compared to the diesel, but we dodged a bullet there too. But it was interesting, man. The motor mount was the hardest part. The wiring, it wasn't so bad. I just got the schematics, read it like a book, and figured out what I needed. The only thing I had to do separately, aside from delete some circuits, of course we're not using the glow plug relay, we're not using the timeout relay for the glow plugs, we're not using the temperature sensors, harnesses, all these good things. So a lot of those were deleted from the harness. But the only thing I didn't have was a kill wire when you turn this off. Because the way the wiring schematic was for the diesel, when you turn the key off, it would drop power to the fuel solenoid, and it would kill the fuel of the diesel, and then the engine would die. Nowhere on that circuit, when you turn the key off, did any wire go to ground. At the key switch, when you switch that key from on to off, all contacts become isolated. They don't touch anything else. So what I had to do was run a kill circuit, which was powered off of a relay. Well, I should say I made a relay circuit for the kill, because what I needed is a wire that would go to ground when you turn the key off to ground out the armatures on the coil. That way the engine would die. So what I did, took that wire that was going to the fuel solenoid, used that as my trigger wire for my relay. So your relay, you've got your normal contact points. Usually if you've got the relay energized, it'll pull in a set of contacts. It goes from like 87 to 87A or whatever it is. So what I had it set as, when that relay is energized, so key on, it pulls the contacts in and breaks ground. What that does is that wire goes to my coil packs, and when you got the engine running, key on, that relay is holding the contact off of the pin that goes to a ground wire. When you shut the ignition off, drop the voltage, relay relaxes. Now it connects that circuit, grounds the ignition coils to a ground wire on the frame chassis. Somewhere in the wiring system I had it grounded out. So parallel to that, I'm still using my oil pressure safety switch on the engine. That way, in case you run low on oil, something like that, you're not checking it, you lose oil pressure, it's going to kill the ignition. So when you're looking at the drawing, I've got armatures, the coil packs up here, and then my relay. Well, I went up and just kind of went lateral. I made a lateral run because it's single wire, just the oil pressure switch. So now it can be grounded by the kill circuit from the relay, or it can be grounded by the oil pressure sensor. You're like, well, if the engine's not running, it's going to be grounded out all the time. It's not going to start. The only thing it changes is, instead of getting that instant fire up, it's about 2 seconds of crank time, just enough to build oil pressure to break that switch off of ground and allow the ignition to fire. So that's all been taken care of. That's all been good. This has been a heck of a learning experience. This is probably my first and last time doing this to a mower, but it's because I love you, Bob. That's what it is, buddy. So you're always good to me, so I'm gonna treat you right. Yeah, I'll be glad to get this thing out of here, man. I know you'll be glad to get it back and mow that grass. That's why we went from diesel to gas, because it was going to be a lot more cost effective and it's a better fix overall. So hopefully the horsepower keeps up with the demand at full throttle, full blade, full cut. Let you know. Yeah, awesome, man. Got it all in. I just need to get the belt, the right size belt, because the one I had just don't fit at all. I don't know why, but you know, the one that's supposed to fit it doesn't fit it. And I routed it right, still don't fit. I'm gonna get a shorter belt. That'd be all good. This little guy back here runs this little belt. That's all good. Still gotta put the belts on for the blade belts. But now we got a gas engine in here where there was a diesel engine in here. So this is what's awesome. Got the key switch. That was always the same. PTO switch. That was always the same. Temperature gauge don't work because it ain't got one. Still got voltage though. That's cool. I had to put a choke cable on here because it's not a diesel anymore. Hooked all the throttle up, so everything works how it's supposed to. You can choke it remotely, just like a, yeah. So this is what's awesome, just like that. You can choke it a little bit, screw it, just like that. She runs away on you just like your first girlfriend. Yeah, baby, just like that. She's in there tight, fine as frog hair. Look at that clearance, not much at all, but it ain't touching. This dude is tight, 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 tight. Very tight and tight. Oh yeah, look at that there. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, that's a good one. That's what we like to see there. Very, very nice. Oh yeah, look at that. Look there. Getting her done. All right, here we go, taking her on her maiden voyage. Fingers crossed. That's not good. Okay. Got a bunch of leaks from places that I never messed with. That's fun. Leaking down from both pumps. Well, I'll get them little leaks finished up there, get that all fixed, and then this pain in my neck will go away. But get the drippies fixed, a little bit of fine tuning on the carburetor. I know it's brand new, but she has to be choked just a little bit for her to run. No dirty comments. But that's it. She's all in there. Everything fits. I'll show you a wrap around of the motor, how nice and tight and clean this thing is. It looks like factory, so that's what we're going for. Quick little PSA here for anybody that buys a brand new Vanguard out of the box. So I don't know if it's just this one or maybe it's the whole lot run or whatever, but this motor would not run right without being choked a little bitty bit. So here's the problem. When they put the gasket on here, not for the carb to intake body gasket, but this little neck right here. Problem is where this gasket goes between this little neck here, which goes onto your boot to the air box. Between here and the carburetor, there's a gasket. Where that gasket sits, you see how it's all open in here now? There's a piece that ran from the center top to the center bottom that covered 1, 2, 3 vacuum boosted ports, which it needs that when it sucks air in to get that mix to draw that fuel into the engine, because it was lagging really bad. It would hesitate when you throttled it, or at idle, it would hesitate. You'd have to have it choked a little bit. So took my finger in here, ripped out the top half and the lower half, that way this thing breathes and it's actually using these ports as it was designed. So if you're having issues with a brand new Briggs engine that you put in there, take a look in there. It's not hard to get to. See if that gasket is blocking those ports, because if it is, tear it out. Put that boot back on there. I'll be honest with you, I had every intention of pulling that carburetor off, and that's why I took that boot off of there, because I was going to break ground and pull this freaking carburetor off here and see why it was running so lean. And then I saw that gasket in there. I kind of wish I'd have had a video. Well, I do have a video. I might have a video of this thing running the way it did before, hesitating, coughing a little bit, definitely lean, and you'd have to choke it a little bit to get it to run good. And I wish I would have shown the gasket before I tore it out of there, but yeah, it's whatever. And I pulled the gasket out to allow those ports to be open. Obviously this doesn't apply to fuel injected motors, but for the old school carburetors and the ones that still use them, they rely heavily on that. It's called a vacuum signal. And so when the air is rushing in past those ports, it draws a vacuum. And when that vacuum is drawn across the ports, it pulls fuel out. It's like a Venturi system. That's kind of how that's designed to work. Air blows past an orifice and it draws a vacuum on the tube, pulls up fuel. I'm going to show you a little video I do with my kids here to show you exactly how that works and why it's important. So this is like your pickup tube going to your carburetor, right, for the fuel. Make sure we get all this in here. What happens, I might even be able to just use this. When it's sitting in your fuel like this and the vacuum comes across it, watch. That's how a Venturi system works. Air gets sucked across it, and then it sucks the fuel out of the bolt. The more air, the more fuel. The problem is, that port was blocked, so it wasn't sucking fuel.
What have you used too?
That's how it works. A little bit of air, a lot of air. That's how your pickup tubes work in your carburetor. Since that one was blocked, it wasn't sucking any air across those ports to get it to give it the fuel needed. And just like that, Thanks for watching. I know this is a long video, big headache. You guys feel like tackling something like this, go from a diesel to a gas, it's entirely up to you. Just know you got to have some patience, some resilience, stay disciplined, and you'll get through it. So if you have any questions, reach out, ask me. I'll tell you what I found along the way, what you need to know. That's all I got. God bless you guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you around on the next one.